Hey, I'm going to start this one. It's on ancient Greece in 18 minutes. So, we'll see.
We might think we already know everything about ancient Greece. The Parthenon, the 300 Spartans, and blind Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are familiar to all. Yet there were far more than 300 Spartans. The Parthenon was actually built as a kind of central bank, and no such unified state as ancient Greece with Athens as its capital ever existed. The Trojan War was as distant in time to Alexander the Great as the Vikings are to ourselves. So let's try to get our heads around ancient Greece, and hopefully a little quicker than in 2,000 years.
That was the timeline perspective I didn't know I needed today. Alexander was as close to the Trojan War as we are to the Vikings now. It's funny how skewed the concept of time can become in one's mind. It made sense once I said it out loud, though. That's like how they say that Cleopatra lived closer to the time of the building of the first Pizza Hut than she did the building of the pyramids of Giza. I haven't fact-checked that one, though. Anyway, this is the same channel that brought us ancient Rome in 20 minutes, so looking forward to this one.
3,716 years ago, the pyramids of Egypt were already standing, and Babylon was the world's first megapolis, home to a prototype of the Tower of Babel. On Crete, however, a mysterious civilization was flourishing. It had three-storied palaces, and all this with no defenses. The Cretans apparently led a relatively peaceful life, admiring flowers, blue monkeys, and beautiful women, walked around topless, while the men preferred loincloths or skirts. The Cretans had a navy and their own writing system, and nobody has yet succeeded in deciphering them. Until one day, on the island of Thera, the modern-day wedding paradise of Santorini, all this ended in the greatest volcanic eruption in European history. Part of Thera sank beneath the waves, presumably giving rise to the myth of Atlantis. Tsunamis 100 meters high and vast ash clouds stretching for thousands of miles around. Crete never recovered from this eruption, and invaders soon swarmed in. The once peaceful island then filled with bronze weapons and tablets written in a new, strange language, which turned out to be the earliest known form of Greek, spoken by warlike tribes, which had settled the nearby Greek mainland, building such cities as Thebes, Athens, Mycenae, and Pylos. But these cities already sheltered behind 6-meter walls. Life here was not peaceful at all. A few centuries later, the Greeks themselves explained them with legends of Cyclopean builders and were no longer aware that any other civilization had come before them on Crete. By this logic, even the half-bull Minotaur was half Greek. Nobody batted an eyelid at the fact that games with bulls were a purely Cretan form of entertainment. Greeks appropriated...
That was punny. Now I'm wondering about the etymology of the word Cretan. It's spelled different, though. Cretin. It usually means idiot or intellectually challenged, we'll say. Maybe it has no correlation at all, though. I'll check and get back to you.
Everything they met on their way with great virtuosity. In conquering Crete, they had conquered the seas. Marine trade saw them grow even richer. Almost all the inscriptions found among the heaps of gold in the tombs of Mycenae are financial accounts. Mycenae took the lead in the fight against Troy in Homer's Iliad. As recently as 150 years ago, this story was considered a fairy tale, until a millionaire and amateur archaeologist, Heinrich Schliemann, excavated Mycenae.
Sounds
and
German.
Troy, a replica of the legendary Trojan horse, now stands here. Archaeologists have indeed found traces of fire and destructions at Troy, but this was accompanied by the decline of virtually all regional settlements. Unceasing attacks by barbarian tribes turned the whole Mediterranean into a war zone. The next 400 years were a dark age. Literacy fell into oblivion, leaving us with nothing to read about the events then taking place. Fortunately, what we do have is Homer. Everybody has heard about the blind poet, the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey. In actual fact, we don't know what Homer looked like, or when he lived, whether he was one man or many. But even though the Iliad and Odyssey were written down after the Dark Ages, the daily routines of its characters take us right back to this time. Odysseus, for instance...
Which one do you like better, the Iliad or the Odyssey? And why is it the Odyssey? I'm kidding, say what you really think. But that thought that Homer might be multiple people reminded me of that similar idea people have about Shakespeare, that either he didn't write all of those plays by himself due to educational disparity, or he was a collective of people. It's an interesting one. Are they theories about Homer and Shakespeare, or are they true? I think it's going to be one of those that we probably won't ever know with certainty.
Was only king by virtue of his larger flocks of pigs and goats. His father slept on the ground in ashes with his slaves. Homer's characters were illiterate and used heads of cattle in place of money, a far cry from Crete and Mycenae with their three-storied palaces. What had happened? The Mycenaean civilization was destroyed by the Dorians, who, though Greek, were totally savage. The earlier population either hid in the mountains or fled to the east. Of all the achievements of the previous civilization, the Dorians left only the essentials, the sailing ship and the potter's wheel. It took a further 4 centuries for them to start adding the most primitive depictions of animals and people. At around the same time, the turn of the 9th and 8th centuries BC, the Greeks in Ionia borrowed a completely new alphabet from their Phoenician neighbors. This bore little resemblance to the linear writing styles of Crete and Mycenae. Do you recognize the modern Greek letters? The fog of Dark Ages had started to clear.
Back to etymology now, I'm wondering if phonics comes from Phoenician. Because it's Greek for sound, right? Phonogram. I might be reaching.
Only here do we begin to recognize ancient Greece, the country that never actually existed. This was no state with an established border or capital, but rather a multitude of distinct and completely independent cities, polises. How did this come about? Greece is a land divided by sea and mountains into separate little parts, of which only a handful was suitable for agriculture. Even grain had to be imported. But why not grow it yourself, over there, across the sea? Thus, the great colonization began. If the first historians are to be believed, Miletus alone founded 90 colonies. The heel of the Italian boot was colonized too, followed by the alphabet that would form the basis for Latin and take over the world. Greek civilization spread from the modern-day Rostov-on-Don to Marseille, laying the foundations of the French wine industry. Fragments of amphorae scattered from Gibraltar to Georgia. These were containers for grain and wine. The latter was diluted with water in proportions of 1 to 3. Only barbarians would drink it neat. For trading purposes, coins appeared. Like the alphabet, these too were borrowed from their neighbors.
I'd probably be barbarian about it. I don't want diluted wine.
According to Plato, a few centuries saw the Greeks settled around the Mediterranean like frogs around a pond. And yet, 2 cities, Athens and Sparta, almost did not participate in colonization. The Spartans descended from the warlike Dorians that had destroyed the Mycenaean civilization. They solved the land issue by conquering their neighbors in the broad, fertile region of Messenia. The locals were declared helots, something midway between slaves and serfs, and greatly outnumbered the Spartans proper. Sparta transformed from an ordinary polis into a military camp, whose main task was the prevention of any uprising. Things were quite different in Athens. Land hunger there had forced the aristocracy and the people to come to terms, and from this, democracy was born. But first, the tyrants took power. A Greek tyrant did not necessarily terrorize people, rather the opposite. Typically, he was an aristocrat who had quarreled with his peers, holding out promises of a better life. He used the common people's support to seize power by force. From then on, all his energies were focused on retaining power. The tyrant therefore made no reforms and simply drove any rival aristocrats from the polis. To divert the attention of the populace, tyrants introduced and fostered new festivals and cults. The dissatisfied could perish in the brazen bull. But you can't roast everyone.
True.
The tyrants were overthrown, and the suppressed aristocracy attempted to negotiate with the people, giving birth to Greek democracy. If an ancient Greek were to see modern democracy, he would just say one word: oligarchy. Ancient democracy was direct, with no representatives. If a polis had 6,000 citizens, they could all freely participate in the assembly. Admittedly, the number of citizens was less than a quarter of all residents, excluding slaves, women, and the migrant workers called metics. By the middle of the 6th century, the Ionian cities were most advanced, eclipsing Athens and Sparta. They were the first to master such Eastern innovations as the alphabet, coinage, mathematics, naval fleets, and complex trade logistics. Meanwhile, a sudden threat appeared to the rear: the vast Persian Empire. Miletus still hoped to preserve its independence, and with Athenian aid, attempted to resist. Unfortunately, this was in vain, and the Persians torched the city and pressed on. Their attempts to subdue Greece lasted 20 years. We owe our knowledge of this to the first historian, Herodotus. According to his account, as many Greeks fought for the Persians as supported Athens and Sparta. How did they win? The first reason was military innovation. At the Battle of Marathon, the Greeks used the phalanx, a body of troops fighting in close formation. The Persians allegedly lost 6,400 men, and the Athenians a mere 192, plus the messenger who ran the 42,192 meters to Athens to announce the victory, after which he dropped dead. The second reason was already becoming a meme. At the narrow coastal pass of Thermopylae, King Leonidas led the 300 Spartans, who held back hundreds and thousands of Persians for 3 days. Sure, a few thousand Greeks from other cities and their helot subjects were a big help, yet the Spartan spirit was key. Not for nothing did they live in barracks, even during times of peace. And the third reason was the fleet. Several years prior to the invasion, silver deposits had been found near Athens. This windfall might have been spent on anything, but it was decided to put it towards the construction of 200 triremes, fast and maneuverable warships with 3 rows of oars. Thanks to this new naval force, the Greeks broke the Persians in a decisive naval battle. A counter-offensive began. The Greeks of Sicily defeated their old rival, Carthage. A scattered array of polises thus defended the territory in which classical Greek culture was born.
Wow, that was quick.
To permanently defeat Persia and liberate the cities in Asia, Athens founded a maritime union. Finally, Athens had become the center of the Greek world. 150 cities agreed to make annual payments for the maintenance of a common army and navy. The treasure was kept on Delos, the sacred island of Apollo. Shortly afterwards, however, patronage was passed to Athene, motivated by greater fiscal reliability, of course. Little imagination is required to suppose which polis was chosen for her headquarters. The most elite real estate in the 5th century BC was the Parthenon. It was constructed not so much as a temple, but as a kind of central bank, housing all the allied treasury. Without these funds, the Greek classics wouldn't have existed at all. No sculpture, drama, philosophy. The strategist and orator Pericles became the head of this new financial center. He concluded a 30 years peace with Sparta, restored the Acropolis that had been sacked by the Persians, and extended fortress walls to the city harbor. This was rebuilt to a grid layout, a forerunner to New York. While the sculptor Phidias was immortalizing Greece in stone, the philosopher Anaxagoras expressed an outrageous idea that the sun was not the god Hellas, but a burning body equal in size to Peloponnese. A whole great culture was created in half a century.
Yeah. This is one of the most interesting wars for me to read about. There's this Yale course, I think it's just called Introduction to Greek History, that starts in the Dark Ages and it goes to the 4th century. Maybe a bit after 4th century Greece. I'm not sure, but everything in between. So the Persian Wars, the Peloponnesian Wars, war singular, and then Athenian Empire. I'm going to find that for you and I'll link it in the bio.
Sparta and its allies grew jealous of Athens' prosperity. A Cold War had smoldered between them ever since the victory over the Persians, and things warmed up in 431 BC. The Spartans and their allies besieged impregnable Athens. Its inhabitants took cover behind the walls. The grain supply from Africa was cut off, and those shipments that made it through brought either typhus or the plague. Even Pericles himself perished. He was replaced by demagogues. Whoever promised the most was elected strategist. So Alcibiades, the unscrupulous nephew of Pericles, became the head of the Athenian armed forces. He proposed a short but victorious war. Let's pack it all in and sail for Sicily, as if the altercations with Sparta weren't enough. The fleet was ready, but something inexplicable happened the night before the voyage. All around the city, someone smashed off the most prominent parts of the Hermes statues. Alcibiades was accused of provocation, but he fled to Sparta to beg political asylum. The chief strategist then proceeded to advise the enemy. The allies began to drop out one by one. Athens agreed to a humiliating peace with the condition of demolishing its defensive walls. They had targeted Hermes, and the might of Athens was crushed. On the bright side, this was the heyday for Greek tragedy and comedy. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, the three great tragedians, and the comedic playwright Aristophanes created plays that are still relevant today. And yet they penned them in the full confidence that the first production would be the last, as was the way in theater at the time. Classical drama was always about current events, and while things may have been getting worse in the city, culture flourished.
Ooh, this is a good time too.
There was no winner in the Peloponnesian War. All Greek cities fell into decline. On the other hand, unexpected surprises would come from the Macedonians, distant relatives of the Greeks who had always been regarded as semi-barbarians. And then even the great philosopher Aristotle went to work in Macedonia as tutor to an extremely talented boy. The boy's father was Philip II. It was he who built up the Macedonian kingdom, defeating a Greek coalition. He almost managed to unite Greece in order to fight the Persians.
There's also a video on Kings and Generals YouTube channel, I think it is, on the diplomacy of Philip II. Very good.
But Philip was killed, and his son, known to us as Alexander the Great, blazed his way through Asia, broke the army of the Persian king Darius, but still refused to turn back, reaching India. Thus, a new world was born, the Hellenistic world. Greek and Eastern culture blended to form a new hope, as cities by the name of Alexandria sprang up in almost every land, though without any democracy. All officials in Asia spoke Greek, and new Oriental gods became neighbors with the old Greek ones at Mount Olympus. Alexander was proclaimed a god himself in Egypt. Protocol obliged all to follow Eastern tradition and fall at his feet. We can only wonder at how this might have ended. Greek decrees have been found urging the spread of Buddhism, but Alexander died young. Babylon, the place of his death, had become the capital of an empire, which immediately began to crack at the seams. While the successors of Alexander warred with one another, a new ambitious power was growing in the West. In 146 BC, the Romans conquered Greece, and in 30 BC, they conquered the last stronghold of Hellenism, Egypt. But Greek culture was victorious even here. Spread by the Romans, it finally conquered the world. Romans began to read the Iliad and Odyssey in Greek, followed by the Greek New Testament too. In 330, Emperor Constantine built a new city on the site of the old Greek colony of Byzantium, Constantinople. This was the starting point for the history of the Byzantine Empire, which extended the life of Greek culture another 1,000 years, leaving us the weird Russian alphabet, for instance.
Okay.
Did you like our video?
I did. I also really liked the map they used. I didn't want to pause it too much. The narrator has a perfect voice for this. he is to ancient civilizations as, I don't know. I was going to say Morgan Freeman, but maybe David Attenborough is to nature documentaries. I actually don't know who narrates this, but it's the same one as the ancient Rome video. So if you know who it is, please let me know. It was informational. I found it very engaging, but maybe I'm biased because I'm interested. So this was the Arzamas channel. I'll link it down below for you, but they don't have many videos in English from what I've seen of the titles. Maybe you speak Russian though, so you might want to check it out. If you think something should be expanded on or clarified from the video, please feel free to do that. Of course, he wasn't going to get into all of the intricacies of ancient Greece in 18 minutes, but all things considered, I think he crammed a good amount in there. I'll add some podcasts and courses on the subject for you in the bio. A really interesting one as well, this is more on Persia, is Dan Carlin's King of Kings. He goes into the Persian kings. That's a great one. And for a literary recommendation, I mentioned in a previous video that I really like, or I've liked growing up Greek mythology, so I'm going to add some mythology related books down below. I'll try to be Greek specific, so Heracles, not Hercules, but I do like Roman mythology as well. One of the books that I have in my mind, I think the author's called Emily Kipp Baker, if I'm not mistaken. She mixes both Greek and Roman mythology. And then there's also Mythos by Stephen Fry, and then he wrote a follow-up to that one called Heroes. I like that a lot. I feel like he geared it towards the adult mythology lover. There's another one I had in my mind. Robert, I'm not sure what his name is. I have about 4 mythology books in my head, so I'm going to make sure to add all of them in the bio. If you have any other literary recommendations from not only this time period, but we'll say Greece in general, Greek writers, please feel free to either link the title or just write the title. And that's all from me. This was a very fun one. So leave your thoughts on any of it, and thanks for watching with me.